Hi there.
Hello, Lynn.
So what was going on with you to bring you to this way of eating?
Sorry,
The
I must put
carnivore
this down.
diet.
Well, I find it quite strange that I'm in this position because I kind of can see myself from where I was back then and kind of watching myself and I'd be so surprised to be sitting here answering that particular question because vegetarianism was important to me for a very, very long time. I became vegetarian when I was 18. First of all, because I traveled for a year with my boyfriend at the time. It was an extraordinary year through the Mediterranean and the Near East. And we decided not to eat meat for health reasons because we were traveling on such a low budget. So we thought that it would actually protect us from getting sick, which wasn't actually true because I ended up getting giardia in Turkey. but that was sort of the philosophy. And also because we were on a tight budget, so that we could only eat in sort of very kind of like just regular local kind of cafes. So it was cheaper as well not to eat meat. So then I came back to the UK and I read a book about how sausages were made and the factory farming, and that was kind of it for me. So initially it had been a little bit about health, but it very quickly became about ethics. So then I moved to California from England, and there it was really easy to be vegetarian. It wasn't so easy in the UK at the time. So we're talking about mid-80s. This is before it became like really vogue, to be vegetarian. And then, but in California it was really, really dead easy. And of course you have access to such wonderful fresh fruit and veg. So I didn't really think anything of it, but I was getting some health problems looking back on it. I had candida, I had hypothyroidism, I had to take synthetic thyroid for a while. I also had suffered kind of very mild depression, but nothing too serious. So I think because perhaps I was doing eggs and dairy. I've never been vegan. So my health was okay, but I was always struggling with kind of energy levels, but I just kind of assumed everybody, kind of had these things. And I had a few people, when I had gone to doctors to find out what was going on with me, a couple of them had said, I really think you need to start to eat meat. But I was so identified with being a vegetarian, and it was so much part of my sort of worldview and my value system that I couldn't entertain the idea at all. So then I moved to India, and a few things happened. I had a few losses in my life, and then I had a bit of a nervous breakdown, and then the depression came quite severely. I'd never experienced anything like that before, and people say, well, people who understand what depression is, you realize that you'd used the word quite lightly, before, because it's altogether a different animal. And I didn't have access to any kind of mental health over there, but I was very fortunate that I came across a few people online to kind of understand what was going on with me. And then I got into yoga, and I got into a few things that helped me a lot, especially the body first approach. And the yoga was extremely helpful. So then I studied to be a yoga teacher. And then I moved to France, and I was still struggling to get traction. Like I wasn't suffering from severe episodes of depression anymore, but I would still have occasional moderate and mild depression. And I just couldn't seem to, I felt like I just didn't have enough resilience, this was the word that kept on coming to me. And I was actually chatting to Phil about this issue. And he said, why don't you just try and eat some sardines and just see how you feel? And at first I was like, nah, I'm not going to do that, And then he said, well, you could just try it for a week, and if it doesn't do anything, you go back to being vegetarian. And so I went and got some cans of sardines from the supermarket. I never liked sardines, even as a kid. I hadn't eaten any meat or fish for 36 years by that time. And I just remember opening the can, and I was like, I'm not going to put it on a plate. I'm just going to eat it with a stink like the monster that I feel that I am, and I'm going to look at their cold, dead eyes, and this whole thing. And I ate the sardines, and I just had a few bites, and pretty much immediately I had this very strong sense that I had been really missing something nutritional, that this was not all about, working through past trauma and issues. Obviously, there's elements of that, and facing your demons and the shadow and the whole thing, because the depression takes you end up sort of getting so interested in your recovery, and you start to really face a lot of these issues. But I realized in that moment that there was something very, very simple that I was missing, and it was to do with my diet. And so I ate almost nothing but sardines for a week, and it was like an antidepressant. I actually felt, it was an extraordinary feeling. I'd love to know what actually was going on in the brain, because I almost felt like this membrane was starting to grow, in my head, in my brain. There was something about it. My concentration improved, my mood started to stabilize, and I felt this resilience. I felt like, oh, I can deal with this, And when you have mental health issues, one of the things that's so difficult is you feel so feeble. You feel like, just the smallest thing can just, blow you over like you're a feather, And I started to feel, after I started to eat the fish, and then I started to incorporate beef into my diet, a few months later, it was quite a slow process for me, I started to feel not like a feather anymore. I started feeling like something much more stable and secure, and and mountain-like. It's like you just start to feel that that you can endure. The vagaries of life, the changes that are inevitable, sickness, old age, losing people. Of course, they're difficult, but I started to feel somehow, through starting to eat meat, I felt, and this is the irony of it to me, is that I thought as a vegetarian that I had kind of paid my dues, to the planet. My carbon footprint is so much lower because this is what we're all taught, right? And now I realize that that's really an open question, and that I'm making this contribution by not eating meat. So I kind of felt removed from the conversation. Not exactly pious, but I didn't really have to engage that. And now that I'm a carnivore, I feel so much more involved in life and in the conversation around life. And I actually feel more ethical in a way. It's a strange thing. I feel that, and it's humbling, and you kind of accept your place in the universe more as something that does consume other things. And so that's a cycle that's going on, from the micro up to the macro level, from the smallest organisms up to the largest and beyond. And so there's something that's happened where I feel more part of, I was going to say the circle of life, which sounds so cliche, but more part of the circle of life than I did as a vegetarian. And that really surprised me. I never expected that to happen. And I don't feel like a monster anymore. But part of it is actually facing that monstrous aspect of it, right? Because that is the reality of it. So there is this sort of monstrous element, but that's also part of it. That's also part of it. So that, I realized that a lot of like facing the dark side is actually coming to terms with the things that are unpleasant in life, the unpleasant sort of realities of life, and realizing that that needs to be accepted too, that needs to be accepted too. So that's sort of, this is a very long answer to your question, but that's really kind of, where I've come to.
No, it sounds like you're very in tune with your body, and you really sense those changes very deeply, and you can really feel the difference in what's happening in your body, which is amazing. And it almost sounds like you've come back to life.
Yeah, I would say so, because now I feel that when you've had serious episodes of depression, it's like there's like a tiger sitting next to the fridge. It's like you're not quite sure. It kind of looking at you, and you're not quite sure, is it going to bite? And there's this feeling, and when you get a mild recurrence, there's this fear that it could take you down, down that rabbit hole again to a really, really dark place. I don't have that fear anymore. I don't have that fear anymore, because I know that wherever it takes me, I can go there. And it doesn't mean that I've never had an episode of depression since. I have had a couple of episodes, but they last less time, and they're less overwhelming, and I'm just managing better. And it is this word resilience. It's given me resilience, and I feel like there's something about it's like an act of self-love. It's like accepting that you have every right to not just survive but to thrive, and everyone has that right. Everyone has that right. So yeah.
That is so amazing. Did you encounter any opposition from people around you in your circle?
Well, I did. A lot of people still don't know. My ex-husband, who is still vegetarian, although he does bone broth, and that's a whole other part of the story, but he's been vegetarian for 55 years. So he knew, I told him, and that was sort of in the context of his own illness and his recovery. A couple of other people expressed surprise, and there's a few people who themselves aren't vegetarian, but had very much admired the fact that I was vegetarian for so long and found it very confusing and said so. And initially, I didn't really know how to respond to those people, because I hadn't really worked it out in myself. The only answer I could really give is, well, I feel so much better now, So they're happy, obviously, that I'm not so depressed anymore. But I think if there's a few scratching of heads and probably a little bit of like, oh, what's next? Is this a slippery slope? What next is she going to be doing? So yeah, I'm not going around talking about it. But if somebody brings it up.
You are now.
Yes, I'm there. Yeah, apparently I am. That's true. Yeah. Hello, everybody. I now eat meat. Yeah, my secret is out. Yeah, and I think it actually feels really good, to be honest, because I'm a big believer in, I don't think you have to tell everybody everything, of course, but I'm a big believer that secrets kept, and if you're not being authentic with yourself, it's sort of quite damaging, and long term, I think it's just not a good way to live. So I'm a yoga teacher. That's the other thing. I think my Indian teachers would be quite horrified and I was trained in a town in India, Rishikesh, where the whole town is vegetarian. So that would be considered quite shocking in the context of the yoga community, because yoga and vegetarianism go hand in hand, right? So that's something that I think I'm going to just address as it comes along. I'm not scared anymore.
Well, that brings me to my next question. What would you say to vegetarians or vegans out there who are suffering, but because they're part of this community and the ethical reasons and everything else, and they know they're not well, and they're looking for a change, what would you say to them?
I think just really start listening to your body, to the voice in your head, and start to just consider the possibility that you could start to include some meat in your diet. You can limit it if you want. Like, I don't eat chicken. I just don't. Luckily, it's not considered particularly nutritious anyway, but you know, probably the chicken industry is one of the worst in terms of how animals are treated. I still care very much about animals. I tend not to do pork particularly, and I've taken an interest in the way that the animals are raised around me. So, can you take that ethical value that you have, and could you apply that to being a carnivore? Because I think that there's a whole world of opportunity now for ethical carnivory to develop, and for people to, I think it's like going to be an emerging field of this. Of course, the first thing is health and recovery. That's really important. You have to get your house in order. But there's also a lot of room for helping to put positive pressure, not negative pressure, on the factory farming industry, not going and protesting and just putting people's backs up, but to actually investigating and showing that there is an interest, that there's a body of people who are interested in the welfare of the animals, like visiting farms and just to see how the animals are raised. And I think that would be a very, very positive contribution for the carnivore community. And I think actually, although it sounds a bit strange at first, and I've been thinking about this lately, I think actually carnivores could do a lot more than vegans and vegetarians for the welfare of animals, because then they can actually get engaged in the story and become and participate and actually make a positive impact. So I would say that just consider the possibility. Just put it in there and just play around with it in your head for a while, and just see where it takes you. And do some research. Talk to some people who are knowledgeable about this. Listen to their stories, and also believe that you have a right. You have a right to be well. You do. You're part of everything, and you have a right to thrive just like everything else. That's what I would say.
And my last question for you, Beck, is where do you see this carnivore movement going in the future? Like, is this just a fad diet that's gonna blow over and we'll all go back to eating whole grains, or where do you see this movement going?
I don't know. I'm really curious. I think it's really interesting. It feels like this sort of underground club right now, you know. How it's going to break through. I find it really shocking when I talk to people who are working with this diet, doctors who are working with this diet, scientists who are working with this diet and having extraordinary results with their patients who can't get their papers published. You know, I find that just absolutely shocking. So that's a problem. Like, if you can't get this into the medical literature, if there's so much resistance, then how is it going to get into the public consciousness? So, and also, you know, you've got the pharmaceutical lobbies. You know, you've got the food industry that's very much geared up in the opposite direction. So, how that story is going to play out, that's going to be one to watch. But carnivores are a strong, stubborn bunch of people, and I think you know, it's amazing what a small group of people have been able to achieve throughout history when they're determined and they have a common goal and vision and support one another. So let's see.
Thank you so much, Beck, for joining us on the other side of the camera.
You're very, very welcome. You're welcome, Tim.